morning, everyone. It is March 9th, and we are so glad to see everybody here. And I'm going to introduce our speaker, and then I will also tell you a little bit about how this morning will go. So, Arielle Leah Fate Friedtanzer, I hope I said that all right. She is a consultant, educator, officiant, and facilitator. Conversations around death and end-of-life care should be commonplace, accessible, and accepted. She supports individuals in making informed, value-driven decisions so that we may all be able to live fully and die well. I have facilitated intimate group conversations in a variety of settings, providing the support, guidance, and learning each audience requires. And we welcome you, and we cannot wait to talk with you. Arielle has told me that if you have some questions, please put them in the chat, and we will definitely get to them by the end. And I feel that I should, leave with just, I tell a lot of stories. And my mother always tells me that my grandmother, Hetty Diamond, always said, you have to have mazel in life and mazel in death. So with those words of Hetty, Arielle, take it away.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys so much for having me today and for joining. I know today's a rough morning with daylight savings, and so I'm glad that you've come. So to give you a little bit of background as to how I got into this work, because I think oftentimes the reaction I get is that I'm very young to be doing this work. And unfortunately, I don't think that death is ageist. And I think it's something that a lot of us encounter as young people and sometimes don't necessarily deal with or reckon with until we're older. And sometimes we're lucky and we don't necessarily encounter it much until we're older. And so this is something I feel very, very passionately about. And I think I've felt very connected to my whole life. And so I'll tell you a little bit about me and then would love to get to know who's in the room. So as Vanessa said, my name's Arielle Friedtanzer. I grew up in Los Angeles, where I've returned to as an adult now. And excuse me, grew up in a conservative Jewish home, went to a big synagogue. And I didn't realize until I was in college that it was probably strange that I had been to like 24 funerals by the time I was in college, mostly because to me, when I hear about a funeral, it was an opportunity to go. It never felt strange that was sort of my drive. And I've since realized that my siblings also have a similar drive. We're very similar and very different people. And yet my parents instilled something in us that makes us want to go to a funeral. And they both do very different work. So I don't think that's carried over. But I would say that the yearning really came from getting a sense of closure about the person, whether I was close to them or not, just an opportunity to learn about their life. And I would say that the most impactful experiences I had probably around death were with my grandparents. I was very lucky to grow up with 4 living grandparents. My first grandparent died when I was 11. She lived with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's for 5 years before she died. And I visited her in a nursing home every weekend with my grandfather, and again, really felt comfortable in that space. And I think now as an adult realize that was a little bit more unusual. But since then have had very different experiences with my grandparents in life and in death. And I was very lucky that my paternal grandfather, about a year before he died, had played a great game with me called Go Wish. And you can look it up online. I'm happy to send the link at the end as well. And this game allows you to have a very natural conversation about what you might want or value at the end of your life and to be able to communicate that to your loved ones. So I was able to play this game with him in a different way than I normally play it or that I normally facilitate it. And I knew exactly what was important to him. So when my grandmother died pretty suddenly in 2017, although she had been sick for years, but ultimately it was just kind of a random heart valve closure. My grandfather sat the week of Shiva for her and then died the night that he finished. And it was a very spiritually eye-opening moment, and also I would say practical. He was always very concerned about how I would make money doing the work that I loved, and he was sort of that catalyst. I've never really thought about it in that way, but what he gave me was the chance to enact some of the choices that he had told me about. I had no decision making power for him. My uncle and my dad were his medical proxies, but I was very grateful that my family trusted me and the conversations I had had with them and the pictures I was able to show of his choices, and that they allowed me to voice some of that. So in the end, we were able to give him exactly the death that he wanted. And that really catalyzed me into this work. It showed me that while we often wait too long to have these kinds of conversations, if we did have them before that moment of crisis, we often have a chance to shape what the end looks like. And as I'm sure many of us know, that doesn't happen too often in our current day and age. So much of our deaths are medicalized. And honestly, I think traumatic for a lot of us, whether they're expected or unexpected. And that's kind of always the toss up. Like, do you want to die suddenly in your sleep because then you don't have to worry about the pain and the suffering? Or do you want to have a prolonged death so that you get a chance to say goodbye to people? And, there's no right answer. And every person's choices are different, and whether they want to die at home or die somewhere else, totally different. But I think the point for me is that having the conversations early and often gives us a chance not only to shape what it looks like, but also to communicate meaning to the people that we love, and to tell them a little bit more about what's important to us. So my background is in hospital chaplaincy, and I went to NYU for graduate school, and yeah, I've spent the last about 7 years doing this work and just really facilitating conversations and workshops with individuals, with communities, with families, to try to get these conversations to be a little bit easier, give us some more of those tools like Go Wish, which I wish that I had created, but I did not. I just learned about it in graduate school and fell in love. Um, yeah, and so a lot of the work that I do now is exactly what I'm doing here, facilitating this kind of conversation. I do one-on-one coaching with families to navigate those values-based conversations, sometimes to be a thought partner to people as they're making those choices or finalizing estate plans or living wills or anything like that. And again, just to kind of break the ice between family members, whether they're all in play, I would say, in the decision-making process, or if they're not. So that's a little bit about me. And now I would really love to hear about you. So I know that there aren't too many of us on camera. If you are available to be on camera, I would encourage it, just to make the space a little bit more intimate. I know that we are recorded. And what I would say is I would love for you to share as much of yourself as you are comfortable doing. I don't know what happens with these recordings necessarily afterwards, but I imagine that the chat does not get shared. And so what I would say is that I'm going to ask for responses through the chat. So if you're comfortable sharing, whether you're on camera or you're not, I would love for you to do that. So my first question is, if you can respond to this prompt: death right now is blank. Or these days, death is blank. And if you're unsure of how to use the chat, you can feel free to unmute yourself and chime in as well.
Well, for death is, what popped into my mind is getting closer.
Wow. These are some great answers. Something you see as part of your job, but not something you always talk about. A great unknown on so many levels, final and a bit scary as I get older, really depressing. I get that response a lot when I do this, where people say, wow, that must be really depressing. I was like, why would I do it if it was depressing work?
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to share? All right, so I'm going to offer another prompt, and I encourage you to keep responding to this. And as Vanessa said, I've asked that if you have questions you want to go through today, please feel free to put them in early. Right? I know sometimes we save questions for a Q&A at the end, but that way, if we have time, I can address them throughout. My next prompt is, I wish death could be blank. I see painless. I wish death
I
could be
like
painless.
that, painless. Thank you.
I wish death could be predictable, easy, and not scary to people. Walked into gracefully. Wow. Peaceful and
Beautiful.
pain-free. Beautiful answers. Well, I think you guys are definitely taking a step by being here. Not to toot my own horn, but being willing to have this conversation. It's not about me, but when Vanessa and I spoke earlier this week, we were saying that you never really know who's going to show up to something like this, and that so often there are a lot more people who need to have this conversation than are willing to show up. And I said, well, I'm not concerned because the people who show up are the ones who are willing to have the conversation. My problem is the people who aren't in the room, and how do I force them to get there? Which I can't do. But hopefully all of you can kind of have that ripple effect with the people in your lives and can show that maybe having the conversation is a little less scary. I think somebody, I cannot remember who said this, but there's something about knowing the beast, right? And so being able to talk about it makes it a little bit less scary. It makes it accessible instead of course, there is this great unknown. We have no idea, depending on your belief system. I will say I have no idea what comes after death. And so it is scary to think about what comes next, but it's a lot less scary once I can have a conversation with my husband or my parents and say, this is what's really important to me. And I trust that they're going to try as best they can to enact that. It makes it a little less scary to wonder about the process, at least. So my final prompt today is to, if you are coming in here with somebody in mind, whether or something in mind, there's grief that we experience not only for the loss of loved ones, for the loss of pets, for human beings or living beings, I should say, but concepts, for abilities, for roles. If there's something in here that you are grieving today, I would love for you to share that in the chat. You don't have to share it as a whole group. If you'd prefer for it to be private, feel free to just message me. But I just, again, want to have a sense of who's in the room and sort of what you're bringing with you.
So Debbie, I would like a one-on-one with you.
You got it.
My name is Marvin Weiss, and I have a wife with dementia. Still knows who I am, and I get a smile every day when I show her pictures of the children, 10 grandchildren, and 9 9/10, 10 great-grandchildren. So,
Wow.
but I have a problem, so I would do a one-on-one. It's kind of private, okay?
Absolutely.
I'll
Well,
make sure to hook you up, Marvin.
Pardon?
I'll make sure to hook you up.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry that you're going through that, Marvin.
Yeah, we have, where I'm living in senior living, I'll just add this about dying, because it's quite an interesting comment, I think. We had a priest here from Holy Name, right around the corner from the Congregation Sinai. And he was a resident here with lots of pain in his feet. And so when we lost a daughter, I went to him for a little consolation. And we talked, and I said to him, I don't believe in an afterlife. That's just me. And my wife and I have never discussed it, but I don't think she does either. So at any rate, he sort of pondered and he thought about it for a while. We had been talking for a while. And his answer to me was quite interesting. He said, it will be a surprise.
Hmm.
Anyway, make sure you hook me up, and thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. It is interesting, the idea of it being a surprise. That's so funny. In 7 years of doing this work, I've never thought of it that way. And I'm somebody who really likes surprises. So maybe that's what got me into this work. Who knows? Fascinating. Thank you guys for sharing both privately and publicly your responses. There certainly is a lot for us to be holding today, both personally and what's going on in our world. So thank you guys for being here. And I kind of want to, I want to steer this in a direction that allows us to maybe think about celebrating life. A way to harness energy, I would say, towards what it looks like to have a goodbye be a positive, a celebratory thing, rather than something very solemn and depressing, as I think many of us often feel. So the way that I would do this is through planning a memorial or a celebration of life for that thing or that person. And the way that I think we can do this is, you know what? Yeah. Okay. So the way that I think we can do this, if everybody either has, if you're in a space where you can get a piece of paper, a pair of scissors and a pen, please do that. If not, you absolutely can use the device that you're on to write some notes. You can grab just a piece of paper and a pen, a sticky note, a notepad, whatever it is. I think this is the direction we're going to go. So we'll take a moment for you to get that.
While people are getting their paper, although I'm going to be writing on my computer, and then I'll always know where it is. I think already my aha moment is, I've worked with teens for forever, and I always tell their parents that talking to them about sexuality and all of that is an ongoing conversation. You have to do it. It's not easy. And I realize now that talking about death is an ongoing conversation. You have to do it. It's not easy. And it's something that that I do feel strongly about, and hope I can encourage other people to talk about it.
Absolutely. It is so I've been using Go Wish for years, since I was in graduate school, but I went to a program a few years ago that was facilitated by somebody else using it. And she said that she and her husband play it every year on their anniversary. Oh. And I thought that's so fascinating. Like that, it's my kind of person to talk about death on their anniversary. But the truth is that the values change, right? By the state of the world, by the things that we're going through as individuals, by loved ones that we've lost in the last year. And so the same way that every year on our birthdays, we might make a wish, or in my case, an exercise that one of my best friends in college introduced to me was the idea of saying 3 accomplishments from the last year and 3 goals for the coming year on your birthday. So it's the same kind of thing. Things change, and we want to address that, especially because we don't know when that final moment will be.
Right.
So to definitely assess that.
Is this the game?
It is.
Great.
So
I
At the
put the
top-
link, I put the link in the chat, and I'll put the link in the
Amazing.
chat again.
amazing. And at the top, there's the option to play it online. So you can order Go Wish cards to be at home, to play with at home, they always sell them in sets of 2, based on how they suggest playing the game, but you can also play it online for free. And it's a really, really wonderful game. And there are a ton of tools like this. So I don't work for the company or anything. I just tell them I like spreading the word because I think it's a really great tool. Okay, so I'm actually going to change my mind about how we're going to do this, since I know we have limited time. We're going to use that piece of paper or whatever device you want to take notes on, with the pen, but we're not going to do this folding arts and crafts exercise that I was going to have us do. Basically, I was going to have us turn that piece of paper into like this mini booklet. What I will do is I will send a link for that. So in case you ever want to learn how to fold your one piece of paper into a mini booklet, you have that tool. I will do that. But what I want to do again is to create a celebration of life or a memorial for that thing or the person that you've lost. So again, we're not going to spend the rest of our time doing this. We're going to spend maybe about 15-20 minutes. But if you could think about something, I would say the idea that if you haven't gotten to fully memorialize them, or you felt like there was a funeral or Shiva or a memorial service, but it didn't really feel exactly like who they were. Maybe they were a super lively person and it felt very solemn. If you've had some time from the loss and you want to kind of revisit it now where you are, if you haven't gotten a chance to memorialize that loss. I'd seen some comments about the limitations from aging. If a disability is at play, memory loss, as Marvin was sharing before. So anything that you feel like hasn't really been acknowledged in that way, or a loss that you have been feeling a lot of, and you want to maybe seek a different way to find a little bit of closure, or to just own it and name it and live in that grief. I definitely don't encourage people to move on from their grief. I think grief is something that gets incorporated into your daily life and it changes over time. But I always say that if I had a magic wand, I would never do away with grief, because I think grief is directly proportional to the amount of love in a relationship. And for as long as you love that person, I think you're entitled to grieve them. And longer if you want. So so what we're going to do is, I'd love for you at the top of this piece of paper or on your computer or your phone, just write blanks celebration of life, whether that's my body celebration of life. If you're feeling physical limitations, a person's name, a pet's name, whatever it is. It could be a celebration of life, a final farewell, a send off, an ode to so-and-so, an ode to my left leg. I don't know. It could be anything that feels like it's the right fit for the title of this. And then just under that, I would love, I would love for you to write either 3 words to describe that person, that function, that pet, whatever it is that you're mourning, or a dedication to them in some way. And in the meantime, I'm putting that link in the chat for this folding paper video, in case you ever want. Okay. Now, what I'm going to say is we are going to plan this memorial or celebration of life or final farewell as if it is a real event. But if that doesn't feel fitting to the thing that you are choosing to memorialize or grieve or say goodbye to, don't do it that way. You can do it metaphorically. If there's a way you want to change it, you take this however you would like to. So the next thing that we're going to do is I would love for you to write venue and then fill that in. Where would this take place? Is this something that would be outdoors in nature? Did the person really love movies? You want to do it in a movie theater? Did you have a pet that really loved a certain place, a certain park? Is there a place where you feel most at home in your body, or where that part of your body or this disability might feel less restrictive? What's a place that really feels like it's fitting to heal a little of this grief? And our next section, you can write on there, will be audio visual. What do you hear when you walk into this place? What do you see? Is it nature sounds? Is there a certain genre of music playing? Is Billy Joel blasting? Like what's going on? Is it silent? Are there pictures hanging? Are there bright colors? Is it natural sunlight? Are there twinkling lights? What's going on around us? Okay. Our next section, probably the most important one, food and beverage. Is there food? If there's food, what does it look like? Is this something that, is it your favorite foods? Is it the favorite foods of the person you're memorializing? Was there a certain restaurant that they really loved or a certain country that they really loved? Is this the kind of food maybe that you can't eat anymore for whatever reason? And so at the celebration of life, you really want to? The next section, and this kind of ties a little bit into the audio visual, but can also be different, is decor. What would this person, or if that's you, what would you like the space to look like? Do you want people coming in bright colors? Do you want everyone to wear something that belonged to the person that you're grieving? If it's an animal, is everyone coming as a bone? I don't know. You can take this any way you want. our next section is spoken word. Do you want anybody to speak? If so, who? Are there any certain readings or poems or prayers that would be meaningful? And finally, and this is my favorite one, where's your fingerprint? What are the special touches that either come from them or come from you to celebrate them? Is it making sure that their favorite musician is there? Is it having a crying corner in the middle of a really joyful celebration? Um, is it collecting some sort of item in their honor or their memory and distributing that? It's an extra special touch that you can add. Does anyone feel comfortable sharing what they've designed, and maybe just in a couple of sentences? I don't need all of the details, but if there's some things that stand out, that really sort of encapsulate the thing or the person that they're grieving, um, can anyone want to share?
Um, I can just share a few, you know, thoughts in general. And then I have a question. Um, I have made it very clear and known to my family that, you know, at my funeral, whoever speaks, and it shouldn't be real long, must have notes. I have come, I'm in the synagogue. I go to a lot of funerals for people who, I miss, and, I'm happy to be part of that community. But when the frat brother gets up without notes, I want to get the hook out. And it's I, it's amazing sometimes what people say in their eulogies. Recently, I was at one, and the daughter, I guess, had a contentious relationship with the mom. And I called up my daughter and I said, listen, if you have a beef with me, tell me now, not at the funeral. That's just not right. And I've been to a lot of funerals. So the things that stand out to you are really, I have another, there was a friend of mine, her mother, and the rabbi mentioned how much weight she had lost. And I told my family, I said, I don't care how much weight I've lost. No one is to talk about my weight. And
Oh my
I,
gosh.
I just think it's fascinating what people feel they need to share. But my question to you is, um, we see people come from all over the country to a funeral. And sometimes it's sudden. But if this person is sick, do you say that maybe they should have a celebration of life before they die?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So I love the idea of a living funeral. Love it. Now, I don't know how many of you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm. I am not an avid watcher, but I have seen some episodes because my husband is a film and TV critic. So once in a while, I'll get to see things with him. And uh, there was a living funeral episode for those who watched it, and I remember thinking, like, this is like sort of an interesting concept because on the one hand, unfortunately, I have both as in a professional manner and in a personal manner, I've known people who have had these long, drawn out illnesses, ALS or cancer, where they are thankfully in a cognitive state that they could be aware of what's being shared, and possibly involved in planning. And actually, I remember when I was a virtual celebration of life officiant, I remember my first client was an ALS, was living with ALS, and he was so involved. I think we were working with him for like 6 months, and he was so involved. He literally designed the slideshow that was shown. He created a musical playlist. He was, I mean, his celebration of life while being virtual was huge. And it was during COVID. And I remember thinking, like, why have we not talked about this? And we did end up mentioning it as an option to his wife. And he really did not want to be there. He did not want to hear what people said about him. But I think the saddest thing to me is that if we have the chance, why not give ourselves the chance? So I know it's not for everybody. I think that, and I think that there is like I'm not going to, I could die suddenly, God forbid, right? Tomorrow, and never get that chance. But at the same time, if I designed a living funeral for myself today, I'm going to look like, like a narcissist, because that's all I want is like for people to tell me good things about me. I'd actually rather it be a roast. Like, I think that would be more fun to have something like that and be like, okay, just in case, I've done it. But there's also a reason that at any chance I get, like, I'm a leap day baby, so I don't get a birthday every 4 years. I mean, I don't get a birthday every year. And so on the off years, I grew up saying I don't really celebrate it, which is true. And I get very anxious about how to plan something and what I want to do. And I hate being the center of attention in that way. And so this year, my husband and I, like 2 days before, we are like, okay, let's just have our friends over for s'mores. And so literally with 48 hours notice, we just told a bunch of friends and they came over. And eventually they sang to me. And I was like, I totally forgot it was my birthday. Like, I forgot that's why you guys were here, because to me, it was just an excuse to gather friends together. So I would say that if you're not somebody, thankfully, who's living with an illness or expects it, then I would say take every opportunity you can to be with the people that you love, and to write letters that say how you feel about them, or to send emails. And even if you want to say, don't open this until I die, at least then you've gotten the words out that you want to share. But I would encourage for people who are experiencing these long and prolonged illnesses, or who know that it's coming in whatever sense, I think it's a really beautiful opportunity, because I think so often the joy and the humor, and the sadness that come out at a funeral, like oftentimes I hear, I wish they could have been there to hear it, right? And so sometimes I almost feel like they're the only thing missing from the party. Like you're waiting for them to walk in the door because their presence is so missed. And so I think if they're willing to do it, even if they're not physically present, but that they're maybe watching online or whatever it is, for them to get to experience that and have a little bit of closure themselves, I think can be a really beautiful opportunity. So that was a really roundabout way of saying, yes, I really love the idea.
We have Jim and then Susan. Jim.
Okay, so what I found as I was answering the questions, I don't know, let's call it my common denominator through it all, was the audience that I'm applying it to. So my big issue in what I was writing is how to, particularly my grandchildren, process it. Because they're all, like between 5 and 7 years old. There's a group of them, but they're all this, and I don't want them shut out of that process. They need to be able to process the grief and express themselves and feel a piece of it. So most of the answers that I was giving to what you had, in part at least, if not primarily, were reflective of what do I do with them.
Is there anything specific that you might be able to share with us to give us an idea of how that's targeting them specifically?
To be able to express memories, to play a game that they played with, because that's something they'll relate to, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. I think so often in doing this exercise, people will say, it's whatever's going to bring them comfort, right? It's like, I'm not there. So I want to do whatever's going to bring them comfort. And I think so often we forget about the kids. Look, I'm getting emotional, and I always say tears are a sign of strength. So I'm never going to apologize for it. But I think that's really powerful, because I think, a question I get asked a lot is whether a kid should be at funerals, or at celebrations of life, or should they be told? And I am a huge proponent of being honest. I don't think we need to give them all of the details of all the information about how the person died, if it's something sudden or gruesome or whatever. But I think it's so crucial that they end up included in that process. And so to do something so tangible, like playing a game that they love to play with you, in that, to bring it to their level rather than expecting them to bring it to our level, I think is a really, really powerful concept. Thank you for sharing that, and for bringing the first tears out of my day. I love it.
Sue.
Well, so I'm going to kind of be the devil's advocate here,
Okay.
because I have always felt that the funeral isn't for the dead person, it's for the survivors.
Mhm.
And that I have no right to tell my children, my grandchildren, what to say about me. It's for them, not for the person who's dead. Because even though we don't know what comes after we're dead, we can't hear what's going on. It's not to comfort us because we're gone. It's for them. So I just, I mean, we've talked about death in our family. My kids, my husband and I had talked about it. We knew what we had promised each other. Um, and I know what my children know, what I want. We've discussed all this. It's nothing that's and my grandchildren know. Um, but and kind of to talk to Jim, what you just said, um, I was very lucky this weekend to have dinner with my grandson and his very serious girlfriend. And my grandson was having so much fun telling her stories about his grandfather, who's no longer here.
Mm.
And we were laughing and enjoying it. And he had so many funny stories to tell about his relationship with his grandfather. So it was very heartwarming and comforting.
I love that. I love that. What a blessing to be able to hear the stories from his perspective too.
Yes.
I'm gonna push back on something you said. You said you were playing devil's advocate. So which part are you devil's advocating?
Well, talking about giving people instructions what they should say about you.
Oh, that's
I don't believe
that's right.
that. I don't believe in that. Because I don't think it's for me. When I die, the funeral isn't for me. It's for those who are going to be mourning me if they are.
That's so interesting. That's really well. So then I'm gonna devil's advocate you right back.
Okay.
So in twofold. One is back to what Vanessa had asked about living funerals. What if the funeral was for you? What if you did get a chance to hear it? Then does it change not necessarily what you want, like in terms of dictating what you want to hear, but then can the funeral also be for the dead or the dying, not just for the living?
I guess it depends how you look at it.
And the other, I think I was going to say the second thing, but now it has totally escaped me. Oh, I think something that I hear a lot is, I think it's more actually related to like making end of life decisions rather than funerals and celebrations of life. But I think people often say like, I just don't know if it's what they would have wanted. And that I think is a very different kind of grief than the grief of the loss. When people are making those kinds of life and death decisions and saying, I don't know if I should let them go. I don't know, if they're ready, etc. And it's the families who tend to be a little bit more at peace when they say, I know that my mom or my dad or my sibling would not have wanted to live like this. And I'm making the decision according to what they want. Hopefully they've had that conversation, right? And they actually know that this is how they wanted to live and that's what made life meaningful for them. And we can talk about very simple ways to make that happen. But I also, there's a client that I'm working with right now who is a young, very young person, dying of cancer. And she has had me facilitate conversations with her family. And the fascinating thing is she doesn't really need me. And I've kind of said this to them, like, I'm happy to be a part of this, but she's had such open conversations with them and they are all a part of this conversation specifically to support her and to give her a chance to live out her time the way she wants by knowing what she wants when she dies. And she said, I really don't want to be a part of the planning of my funeral. I don't care. I won't be there. You guys do whatever's right for you. And her sister specifically said, it would help me in the grieving process to know that I did what you wanted. And so it's like navigating that tension also of, well, I'm not there, so you do what gives you joy, or what gives you comfort, versus the person who is grieving saying, well, what gives me comfort is knowing that it felt true to who you were. So I think there is that tension, that balance there too.
The other thing I would add, and I know that we have an estate lawyer on the call here, and he's been very helpful to my family. But I would say to Jim that, you know, everyone knows to have a will and, you know, medical proxies and we may have more uh, sessions about that on power of attorney and so on. But, you know, I think that people need to leave an ethical will. And I have done that program in the past, and maybe we need to do it in the future to say exactly what you, you know, you want to leave. And, you know, my father, who died 3 years ago, said, he said, how will my grandkids think of me? And like, he wanted them, take them fishing and, you know, take them here and take them there, and took us on a lot of great family trips. And I wonder what he would have written down if we had asked him to write it down. He loves Shakespeare, so I'm sure it would have a Shakespearean quote in it. So I think those ethical wills are helpful and would be fascinating to grandkids.
100%. I think that's a beautiful idea. There is something called the forever letter. And I'm actually just putting in the chat. I know, Vanessa, that you had mentioned offering some suggested readings. So the forever letter is one of those readings that I would suggest. And it's exactly that, about writing letters to the people that you love. And again, you can give them while you're alive, or you can have them there. There is a documentary I just watched with my husband. That was, I think, it was part of a film festival. I don't remember what film festival, but it was about somebody who was utilizing medical aid in dying, and in Vermont. And so she wrote all these letters, and literally while she was taking the medication, her son and grandkids addressed all the envelopes and put them in the mail as soon as she died. And so, you know, some way to be able to do that and to leave that legacy, I think, is really powerful.
I put it in the chat, the forever
Perfect.
letter.
And I'm sending over those suggested readings as well. And
Oh,
I can
great.
send all this to you, Vanessa, after, in case you
Yes, please,
send a follow-up email.
please, yeah.
But all of these books, there are so many books. I have like 100 books on death and dying, but these are the first that came to my mind. All very different topics. The first three are really more, sorry, the formatting got a little weird, but the first three are more practical about death and what the end of life can look like, and medical interventions, and how to have some of these conversations. The forever letter, as I mentioned, about leaving this kind of living legacy. 57 Fridays is a tremendous book that I just read recently, and I sobbed through the entire thing, about child loss. And When Breath Becomes Air is about a man dying of cancer, and that one's a little bit more famous, but really, really highly recommend these books.
Right.
Yeah.
I
go
would,
ahead.
I would also say, and I know that, again, I'm in the business, but, sharing these concerns with our clergy. They've been trained, and our other educator, Ashley Plotnick, also has been trained in grief therapy and all of this. And so, you have to seek them out. Obviously, if they're doing a funeral for you, they're going to be there. But if something's happening, don't don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. That's their job to come and comfort you, or to come to see a relative who's dying. Andy, did you have a comment? No, you just put your camera.
Thanks for joining. Um, uh, and to echo that, I would say, I think having these conversations with anybody that you can, like Vanessa said, the clergy are trained to be able to facilitate these conversations. The one thing that I have realized, and this isn't a knock on rabbis, they are skilled in so many things. I think oftentimes they are there in that moment of crisis. And they want to be brought in. There's so many rabbis I've offered to help like offload a little bit of that of visiting in hospitals and doing funerals. And so many of them really, I think, went into this work for that purpose. But the one thing that I think they're not always a part of, and that they're not necessarily skilled to be a part of, is the pre-conversations. Not about what you want your funeral to look like, but how do you have this conversation with your family? Do they have time to sit down with you and your loved ones and determine what is most important to you, help you figure that out, and then figure out how to navigate the family dynamics of actually talking about it. And I'll also kind of asterisk that with, it doesn't always have to be with your family. Sometimes that is more complicated. I know in my family, there are 3 kids. We all have very strong personalities. We could all be very capable of making end of life choices for my parents. And because of that, they know we'll kill each other. And so they have taken that decision-making power out of our family. And we all know who their medical proxies are, and that we might be involved in a conversation. They may consider how we feel about it, but ultimately their wishes are communicated to somebody outside of us. So I think it's always really important to be intentional about who you choose for that when you're doing estate planning. I think estates are one thing in terms of finances. Having an executor, of course, that you trust and that your family trusts and knows, hopefully before you die, I think is really important. There's so much that we like keep a secret around this, and obviously we don't. There are plenty of reasons for why we don't share with people what we have in our bank accounts or who we want to get that, or we don't want to like upset things, but I think there is so much that we keep secret that doesn't need to be secret. There are plenty of people who find out that they are medical proxies when the person is on, is lying in the bed in the hospital and now has to make a decision for them. So the more we can communicate openly, the better and the safer. And I think it just deepens relationships. So it allows us to ask, what I can't make every decision based on that piece of paper that you filled out. So if I need to make a choice for you that is in real time about what's meaningful to you, how do I make that choice? There is, before I get to that next question, because I can't read and talk at the same time, that there's in Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal, there's a story about about an article that he had published before that, in which he mentions Dr. Susan Block, who's a palliative care physician, and she interviews, she all day in and day out, she asks people what's meaningful for them at the end of life. And when her father was going in for surgery, she was with him at the hospital the day before, and then she left the hospital and realized that she didn't ask him how to make a decision for him. So she went back to the hospital and she said, this is really awkward, Dad, but if something happens to you tomorrow, how do I know how to make a decision for you? And he said, if I can watch football and eat chocolate ice cream, do everything you can to save me. And she thought that was a really strange answer because he didn't watch football. So very weird choice. And in the end, there was a complication during the surgery, and the doctor called her and said, what do you want me to do? And she said, will he be able to watch football and eat chocolate ice cream if you do this? And he said, I think there's a really good chance that he will. So they did whatever intervention it was. He ended up paraplegic as a result of the complication, but he survived and he was in a wheelchair. He wrote articles and books after that. And in that one sentence, he was literally able to sum up the quality of life that would make life meaningful for him. And so if it's less about a DNR or running a full code, or if it's about feeding or intubation, it's less about these actual interventions and more about what state of being am I willing to live in, and what isn't worthwhile for me. If I can't recognize the people around me, is that not worthwhile? If I get sick in that state, is it not worth antibiotics? There are so many questions that can come up. It's infinite. So the more we can talk about values and less about actual medical interventions, I think the safer we are.
I think Bill's question, he's curious as to what you would say to family members when in line before the funeral, which I don't know. I think that's a Chicago thing. You have
it?
like 60 seconds to say something. They're standing there, they're crying. Some people in Chicago have done away with it, but I've seen many where we still do it.
I've only seen that at a non-Jewish funeral, so that's so fascinating to me.
Which is why I put that in context. I've
Thank
seen
you.
people say, "Oh my God, I can't believe you do this in Chicago." We do, although I've seen more families opt out of it recently.
I think my first gut would say, "I'm so sorry," which I know feels also like useless, sort of in that moment. I honestly think if you know the person well enough and there's like a very short memory that you could share, I think that would probably be the most powerful, because I think everybody else in line is saying, "I'm so sorry," or in horrible, I think a horrible choice of, at least they're not suffering anymore, or they're in a better place. I hate all of these platitudes. So I think if you know
Which
them
you
well,
don't usually hear at Jewish funerals.
that is true. That is, well, sometimes you hear at least they're not suffering anymore,
Yeah.
or like at least it was, quick, or
Yeah.
right. But I think you're right. We don't necessarily talk about the next place, which is helpful. But yeah, I would say if you have a short story, particularly if it's a funny short story, I think I would do that, something that would bring joy. And otherwise, I would say maybe like something like there aren't enough words to say how sorry I am, and I'll still be here when this is all over. Again, the other thing is that I don't know how much families remember from the funerals. Like I think I remember everything from my grandparents' funerals, and I think it was like such a vivid experience for me. But I don't know if I remember everything. And I think if I was for sure even more of a direct mourner, I think would have felt very different.
Yeah,
But that was a great question.
I agree with you. And I know, talking to clergy, that they sometimes discourage immediate mourners. If it's your family, if you're saying Kaddish for the person, mother, father, children, brother, sister, because you're so overcome with emotion.
So I'm just gonna, I know that we're out of time and I want to be respectful of all of your days. But I wanted to, I'm gonna put a few things in the chat in case you wanted to click them so that they open up on your end if you're on a computer or a phone. And then I will send all this to Vanessa after for her to send a follow-up. But the first thing is the last part of my session, which I anticipated I probably wasn't going to get to, is a handout that I often give on suggestions for grieving. So it's both caring for yourself when you're going through grief and caring for others when they're grieving. Feel free to take a look or not, totally up to you, but kind of just like a one-pager handout. And then the last is my contact information. Again, I will send this all to Vanessa, but if there's anything you want to take a look at, sorry, the formatting just really comes out so wonky in Zoom. If you want to get in touch with me, please do. When I do one-on-one coaching, I always do a free consult. So there's no obligation at all. And I would love to be able to support you in wherever you are on this journey. And I commend you for at least taking the step to come and have a conversation or be in presence for a conversation, because sometimes just hearing the word death is the scariest part. And so being willing to choosing to be part of something that uses that word is very brave.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here.
We can't thank you enough. You've given us so much to think about. We have been recording and it'll be up on YouTube by tomorrow. And, you know, there may be some people that you would like to share this with. I'm going to be sharing it with our clergy. And, you know, gave us a lot to think about this morning.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for
Thank
having me.
you. Thank
And
you,
please reach out with
everybody.
any questions.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Next week, I should tell you, is virtual, and his name is Eddie Shapiro, Ladies of the Theater. So, from Arielle to Eddie, who's going to talk about Jewish leading ladies on Broadway. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.